This podcast planning method I'm about to show you has generated hundreds of thousands in revenue for the business who use it, and it's the exact same framework that some of the top narrative shows in the world use to build their audience. And now I'm giving it to you. Look, I'm going to be honest. Most business podcasts are a complete waste of time. They are pretty much just random conversations that build zero momentum and generate zero results for the business. I've personally spent years in strategic marketing, and I've analyzed dozens of the world's top performing narrative podcasts, and I've broken down exactly what makes them drive real business results. And what I learned is that the businesses that succeed with podcasts aren't using them as glorified chat shows. They're in fact using strategic narrative structures to build authority, to drive engagement, and to generate measurable ROI for their businesses. So, just 10 minutes with me and you'll walk away with the exact podcast planning method that can completely change the game for your show. So why do narrative structured podcasts work better than random interviews? Research shows listeners are 14% more likely to listen again to narrative shows versus interviews. And brand favorability jumps 10% higher with narrative structure. So you can literally boost how people feel about your brand by 10% just by restructuring your content. No extra production costs, no famous guest, just better structure. The narrative framework creates natural hooks and engagement that pure interview shows just cannot match. The best part of all this is that you don't have to abandon interviews altogether. The top performing branded podcasts use a hybrid approach where interviews become part of a larger story. So here's the three-part planning method we're going to cover today. First, we'll define your podcast's core story elements. This is the foundation everything else builds on. Second, we'll map your season arc, and this creates the momentum that keeps listeners coming back. And third, we'll structure individual episodes for maximum impact. This is where we connect your content directly to your business results. And like I said before, this works for interviews too, not just for narrative shows only. The difference here is that you will select guests and questions that serve your larger story, instead of just booking whoever is available. Look, most people overcomplicate this. They create massive strategy documents, endless content calendars, and very complex workflows. When your strategy doesn't fit one page, you don't have clarity, you have confusion. So I've decided to create something better, a single page that forces clarity. Think about your current content strategy for a moment. Does it actually fit on one page? Or is it just scattered across documents, platforms, and team members' minds? This one-page planning document gives you strategic focus in one view. And it works for both narrative shows and interview formats. And it connects your content directly to your business goals. So here's what must be on this document. First, your logline. This is your podcast's core promise in one or two sentences. Think of it like your podcast's North Star. If an episode doesn't connect to this, it doesn't belong in your show at all. Second, a brief synopsis. This is an expanded description that sets the expectations for what listeners will get from your entire season. Third, your series arc. This maps how your narrative develops across episodes, creating that binge-worthy quality we talked about before. Fourth is your target audience, and it's important here to be clear that we don't just mean business owners aged 30 to 45, we really mean their challenges, their aspirations, and their barriers to action. And fifth, your business objectives. These are the measurable outcomes you expect from these podcasts, whether those are leads, sales conversations, or authority building. These 5 elements are your podcast compass. They work together to guide every decision you make. All right, to start off, you need to answer 4 critical questions before you record a single episode. And this is so important. This is paramount because most companies skip this part completely. They jump straight into booking guests or writing scripts, and then they wonder why nobody cares about their show. So before you do all of that, you want to ask yourself, what is the underlying theme that connects everything? And this is not your topic, this is your theme. So for example, if you have a marketing podcast, the topic might be digital advertising. The theme might be building authentic brand connections in an algorithm-driven world. If you have a healthcare podcast, the topic might be wellness practices. The theme might be sustainable health habits for high-performance professionals. So think about your theme. Then you want to ask yourself, why is this story important for your specific audience? If you cannot answer this clearly, you don't have a podcast. You have a hobby, which is okay. Maybe you can find a less expensive hobby. Third, does it have enough substance for a full season? I've seen so many podcasts launch with a bang and fizzle by episode 4. And that's because they didn't validate their content runway. Then you want to ask yourself, what perspective will you bring? The internet doesn't really need another generic show. So what is your unique angle? Now let me show you how I applied this to a real podcast. When working on Entrepreneur Abroad, we didn't just pick international business as our topic. Our theme was international entrepreneurship challenges and solutions. Why it mattered? Because there was a growing trend but limited tactical guidance available. And we also had substance for 8 to 10 episodes covering the full journey. And our perspective was practical execution over theoretical ideas. Now it's your turn to put this into your one-page podcast compass, which takes about 30 minutes at most, but it saves you months of creating content nobody cares about. Next up, you need to map your season arc. There's absolutely no way around it. A random collection of episodes will create no anticipation, no momentum, and absolutely no reason to keep listening. So you want to map the progression of your episodes in such a way that creates natural listening flow, builds anticipation, retention, and establishes narrative momentum. So here are the 3 episode mapping methods you can copy right now. First is the bullet point method. This is for simpler shows with a single host and straightforward content. You just map your main topics in a logical order that builds from basic to advanced. Super simple, but still way better than random episodes. Then we have the color-coded timeline, and this works really well when you have multiple elements in each episode. So for example, you might have guest interviews, case studies, narration, how-to segments. Then you map out each element visually across your season to ensure balance. Now remember why we're doing all this: to drive actual business results. Your podcast isn't just entertainment. It's a tool that should move listeners toward becoming clients or customers. That's why the third mapping method, the emotional arc, is particularly powerful to build authority in your space. The emotional arc is what the top narrative podcasts use, and you plan episodes specifically to trigger emotional responses such as curiosity, tension, and resolution. This is what creates super listeners, super fans. So let me show you this in action in the Entrepreneur Abroad podcast I mentioned before. Here's how we mapped it. Episode 1 is pretty much setting up the journey, the decision to move abroad. Episodes 2, 3, and 4 are the rising challenges, visa nightmares, funding issues, team building. These are generally the challenges expat entrepreneurs face when they decide to move abroad. Episodes 5, 6, and 7 are the climax point: market entry, cultural adaptation, and general mistakes. And episode 8 was the grand finale, is the resolution and future outlook, basically scaling beyond the first market. See what's happening there? This isn't random. It's a deliberate journey that pulls listeners through the entire season. So spend 30 minutes here as well mapping your season, and this can literally be the difference between a podcast people forget and one they cannot stop listening to. Now, let's make sure each episode actually drives business results. This is where most business podcasts completely miss the mark. They ramble, they take forever to get to the point, and they never connect their content to actual business results. So, here is the simplest 3-act episode structure that changes everything. Act 1 is the intro. You must hook listeners in the first 5 minutes with compelling stakes. Not a long-winded introduction. Not a generic, welcome to the show, blah, 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 blah. Real stakes that make them think, I need to hear this. Act 2 is the body. This is where you build tension through authentic stories and challenges. Don't just share information. Share the struggle, the mistakes, the breakthroughs. And on Act 3 is the outro. And this is where your business impact happens. Deliver a resolution that naturally connects to your business solutions. Not a pushy sales pitch, but a genuine bridge from their problem to your solution. Additionally, you want to try to keep engagement as high as possible through each episode. You can do that by using music transitions to signal important sections. And I think music transitions are like a pattern interrupt for the ear. They reset attention when it starts to drift. You can incorporate storytelling elements that highlight real problems. So don't just lecture your listeners. Talk about real challenges that your listeners or your industry is facing right now. And then you can create natural signposts throughout the episode. These are verbal cues that guide listeners through complex topics. So for example, you could say, there are 3 key points here, and then you mention them. Or the first mistake was, and then you say what it was. Or this is where everything changed, and then you say what changed. And lastly, you want to connect your episode content directly to your solutions without being pushy. You want to create natural transitions that show listeners how your products or services help solve the problems you've just discussed. So for example, after exploring a challenge in depth, you can briefly mention something like, this is exactly why we developed our framework that addresses these exact pain points. This establishes a clear path from the listener's problem to your solution, making the connection feel helpful rather than sales-focused. So how do you know if your podcast plan is actually working? Well, first of all, don't just look at your downloads. Look at listener completion rates, unprompted shares and recommendations, direct business inquiries that mention your podcast, and of course, audience growth episode after episode. Because if your podcast isn't actually driving business results, you're just creating expensive content. So, download the podcast planning template I've created for you. The link is in the description below. It has everything we've covered today in a simple fill-in-the-blank format that takes 30 minutes to complete, and it will save you months of wasted effort. Or if you want my direct help developing your podcast strategy, you can book a consultation through the link below. I personally want to see more businesses creating podcasts that actually work, that build authority and that drive engagement and generate results for them. So give this planning method a try and let me know how it goes.